Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Backcourt Press NBA podcast / talk show. I'm your co-host Hunter Manick here with my co-host Zach Vinci. Say hello.
What's up, everyone?
So we've been continuing a series. Present day NBA has been going great, but we wanted to try out a little series. As you guys know, if you watched the last podcast, we are going through and ranking all 30 NBA franchises from worst to first. But before we get into that, thank you all for watching. We just wanted real quick. We've been doing this now for a good couple months, and it's kind of crazy how much and how great it's been going so far, and just all the success it's had, especially with just our regular viewers. And we got our Instagram page popping off real quick. Follow us on Instagram if you already haven't. Backcourt Press, we're up to over 800 followers, so I think that's pretty exciting stuff I wanted to promote. That's at Backcourt Press on Instagram, at Backcourt Press _ on Twitter. And of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel and let me know where you're watching. I'd love to make sure we get viewer interaction. So if you want to comment on any of the teams that we're going to be discussing today, we're not going to be doing as much present NBA talk, only on really the teams that we discuss. But please feel free to comment. We'd love to hear your opinions on everything going on. So without further ado, thank you to I-95 Sports Network for starting up. I would really quickly like to promote our Instagram a little bit more and asking Zach about a recent post that he made. So I will add this to the stream. Here is our Instagram page. We're, Backcourt Press. We got our logo right here. And real quick, Zach, you posted this picture the other day. Which of these superstar duos would you most want to build a team around? And I thought this was a really cool post, with the All-Star game going on. We saw LeBron and Curry team up, which is right here, which could be one of the greatest duos ever. But you posted a lot of different ones. You got Wilt and Bill Russell, two of the greatest big men of all time. Kareem and Dr. J, what an incredible duo that could be. Of course, Magic and Bird, we've talked about them so much on this podcast. Hakeem Olajuwon, one of the best big men ever, and the GOAT, Michael Jordan. Then you got Tim Duncan and Kobe and LeBron and Curry. If you had to choose one of these duos to build around, who would you want to do and why?
If I'm strictly putting three role players around a duo, I think I have to go with Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon, because you get two guys who are, first of all, you have MJ, the GOAT, which is, first of all, incredible to have in itself. And then Hakeem Olajuwon, an incredibly talented big man, two-way player, really good offensively, arguably the best defensive big man of all time. Both have shown that they can carry teams to championships. I think both of them would work really well with one another. Jordan's obviously a pretty ball-dominant player, but I think Hakeem could definitely take the role of a less dominant offensive scoring role, maybe be second to Jordan in shooting and stuff. But when you've got offense and defense on both ends of the floor, one big man, one guard, you can fill a team out with that so easily. Get Jordan a shooter on the wing, a decent point guard who can play make, and another big man who can get boards. And I don't see anyone beating MJ and Hakeem. Although I will say Kobe and Duncan are a close second for me. What do you think?
Oh, that's what I was gonna say. Honestly, I think that this duo that I have right above them in being the Magic and Bird, if they were to ever play together, the showtime and just the fun games that we would see would be incredible. And I think really you can't go wrong here, except for possibly this one. I don't know how Wilt and Bill's play styles would match up, but the leadership of Bill Russell and the skill of Wilt Chamberlain, I would love to see that duo dominate in the 90s, possibly in the Jordan era.
I want to see who the hell is scoring a bucket in the paint with Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell down there. And who is getting a rebound down there? I mean, you have arguably the two greatest rebounders in NBA history playing with each other. If you can get some scoring guards on the outside, the 60s might be it, man.
The crazy thing to say is, out of all of these duos, right, there's a chance that Kareem and Dr. J are the worst one that we have up on this list. And to say that,
I don't know, that's
Dr. J, that is crazy.
The disrespect on Kareem's name right there. I don't know about that one. I'm probably still taking Kareem and Dr. J over Wilt and Bill. It's tough to say, but yeah, if you can get some you have the explosiveness with Dr. J. If you can get the shooters around the outside with the two of them, that 70s team would be filthy. I know you said Hakeem, biggest big man ever with Jordan. Nah, man. Kareem right here, best big man of all time, playing with one of the most explosive scorers of all time. That would be a duo.
That's fair enough. Well, real quick, thank you for making this post, and thank you to everyone who
Absolutely.
would follow this page. This is a great page. We try to post once or twice a day on it. All of our pictures are extremely in depth. We really don't just post one little thing. There's normally 5 to 10 slides on these posts and how long they take us. So we'd love if any of you guys who are watching right now could go follow that. So thank you for that. And without further ado, I think we're ready to get back into the second part of our 30-team series. Last time we ranked the worst of the worst NBA franchises, and really the worst of the worst was the Minnesota Timberwolves, as we all expected. But I'll go through the list in case anyone watching did not get to view the last podcast. At 30, we have the Timberwolves. At 29, we have the Clippers. 28, we have the New Orleans Pelicans. 27, we have the Hornets. 26, we have the Grizzlies. 25, the Nets. 24, the Nuggets. 23, the Kings. 22, the Magic, and 21, the Indiana Pacers. It was a pretty fun podcast. We went pretty much in depth in present and past of all of those teams, and we're here to do that today with another 10 NBA teams. So just started off in the late teens and the 20th, I'd say, worst franchise in NBA history. We've got the Toronto Raptors, the inaugural. They're a recently newer team, only being around for around 25 years. Win percentage just under 48%, but a pretty okay playoff win percentage of 47%, along with making the playoffs 13 years. What are your thoughts on the Toronto Raptors history?
Obviously, the Raptors have been bolstered a lot by this past decade, where they've been consistently arguably the best team. You could argue they've been the best team in the Eastern Conference of the 2010s, which is a huge advantage for them. The reason really why they're outside the bottom 10. You mentioned only 26 seasons as a franchise, so they're relatively young, which puts them at an immediate disadvantage. But still being outside the top 10 in that range it's a fantastic mark. What really hurts them, in my opinion, is in their first 18 seasons as a franchise, the Raptors were only able to make the playoffs 5 times, which you expect that as an adjustment period from a new franchise, but it's extremely difficult to overcome. And luckily, man, Kawhi Leonard and his championship run last year is really what solidifies Toronto being outside the bottom 10. They've only been to the finals. That was their first finals appearance ever. Besides that, they've only been to the conference finals one other time. Really, that one championship was what kept them outside the bottom 10. And really, the sustained level of success they've had over the last 8, 9, 10 years. When you can say that you've been the best franchise in a conference for the period of a decade, that's a really impressive accomplishment. And that and the championship in that decade really kept them outside the bottom 10.
Looking at the best players in franchise history, you got longtime Vince Carter, Tracy McGrady, that duo that was there. You got DeMar DeRozan, obviously will go down as probably one of the more underappreciated Raptors of all time, knowing that they had to give him up to get Kawhi Leonard. You got Kyle Lowry, who's I know has been in trade rumors, but to me seems like he's been a lifer with the Toronto Raptors, even though in the beginning of his career he wasn't with them. Even guys like Chris Bosh, Damon Stoudemire. But to me, my question for you, Zach, is Kawhi Leonard the best Toronto Raptor of all time?
I'm going to have to postpone that answer because I'm planning on doing a little series on Backcourt Press once my current one ends about the best players on every franchise overall through their franchise history. So I don't want to spoil the Raptors one, which is definitely one of the closer ones. But championship ring value, very, very valuable to me. Very,
Especially
very valuable. Exactly. They've been to the finals once in their entire career, and they've won it only the one time. Kawhi Leonard is the only person to be able to do that for them. Although, obviously, you got to give some credit to Kyle Lowry and the other guys on that team, because there was a ton of other really good role players on that squad. Pascal and Kyle Lowry, great second and third options, and then Van Vliet balled out in the championship in the finals. And I got to put some credit on Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol's names. Both of them played really well on the inside. So obviously Kawhi had a ton of help in that one championship year. But yeah, definitely. He definitely ranks up there. I mean, I think he's got to be at least in your top 3 Raptors of all time, without a doubt.
I can completely agree with that. I mean, since 2013, the Raptors haven't had a season with less than 48 wins. And I'll never forget, I feel like back in 2010 when I would play NBA Jam with my friends, the Raptors were the joke of the league. I mean, there was that point where it was a young
DeRozan
DeMarco
and Bargnani.
Yes, they were nobodies. And next thing you know, the Raptors go on to be one of the top teams for the past decade. I don't think anyone saw that coming, but shout out to their ownership, their coaching. They had the coach of the year and fired him and then went on to win an NBA championship. I think doing something like that just shows how incredible the ownership is and maybe how good Nick Nurse is, and maybe Dwayne Casey was a little bit of a fraud, as we've seen with the Detroit Pistons. Any thoughts on that?
No, I can't call Dwayne Casey a fraud, man. Dwayne Casey put Toronto on the map as a coach. You gotta give some respect to Dwayne Casey. I know he wasn't able to get it done in the playoffs against some of those piss poor LeBron Cleveland teams in his later years as a coach. LeBronto, yeah. But all I'm saying is none of that. Kawhi and the 2019 Raptors, that team was so much better than any of the other Raptors teams of the late 2010s. So I can't really blame. I think Dwayne Casey was the coach of that team instead of Nurse. I think at the very least they're still doing just as well as they did. Although I don't know, the Sixers might have been able to win the champ.
Hey, no, I as a Sixers fan, it must be hard for you to talk a little bit about that Kawhi Leonard playoff run. You know, as he did hit one of the greatest shots to me and that I've ever witnessed with my eyes, right over Jimmy Butler and Joel. Anything to say about that?
Thanks for putting that imagery back in my head. You had to mention who it was over too, you know. Really, now I'm just replaying it over and over in my head and thinking about how I want to cry because that was the closest Philly has come to a championship in 20 years.
Hey, this year could be that difference maker with Joel Embiid playing at the MVP level he is. But we'll save the 76ers.
Not with Brooklyn.
Next podcast. Blake Griffin signing there. We'll talk about that a little in a future episode. But oh my God, Avengers Assemble in Brooklyn. Moving on from 20-19, getting out of the bottom 10 is a team that's had a very successful season this season, but has not been that successful before this season in the recent decade, and that's the Phoenix Suns, sitting at a win percentage of right under 53%, and a playoff win percentage of just over 48%. You know, they've been around since 1968, and they've had some pretty incredible players as part of their team, including Steve Nash, Charles Barkley, Kevin Johnson, Jason Kidd, one of the most underrated point guards in NBA history, Devin Booker, and now technically Chris Paul. So what are your thoughts on the Phoenix Suns history?
The Phoenix Suns and the team we will see next, who I'm not going to spoil yet, but we'll see them in about 5 minutes, are without a doubt to me the two most successful NBA franchises in NBA history that have not gotten a ring. And both of those teams, I will directly blame Michael Jordan for not allowing them to get a ring, because in my opinion at least, the 93 Suns team with Kevin Johnson and Charles Barkley that lost to Jordan in the finals has a very, very good case to be the greatest team of all time that didn't win a championship. I think the fact that the 2016 Warriors ended up choking would probably put them right there at the front. But that 93 Suns team was incredible and one of the most dominant teams of all time, with Kevin Johnson and Charles Barkley really running that squad. I think in 95% of seasons, that team wins a championship. So I think you really got to put some credit on their name. And overall in Suns history too, this has been a consistently successful franchise. If you ignore the past decade, I know Phoenix has not made the playoffs in the 2010s. They were one of the two squads to be unable to do that with Sacramento. So they haven't been very successful as of late. But in about the first 4 years of their franchise history, they made the playoffs, I think, over 30 of them. So they were incredibly successful in the bulk of their franchise. So you got to put some respect on their name. And they've had two really good runs as a franchise. I mean, both they had the Charles Barkley days, and then I think you also got to put some credit when Steve Nash was there. I know they made multiple conference finals in a row, even though they weren't able to get the job done against some really good Tim Duncan Spurs team, and then D Wade and Shaq on the Heat, two very good teams. But the Suns have been consistently successful. They've had a ton of great players, and if it wasn't for Michael Jeffrey Jordan, they'd have a championship. It'd probably be even higher on this list. So I think they
Yeah.
definitely belong in that middle tier.
Right now, the Suns are sitting pretty high in the West. They've been having a fantastic year. I think the addition of Chris Paul really does show how incredible of a winning player he is, as he is leading them right now to the 2 seed in the West at a 24-11 record. And this team, they went 8-0 in the bubble. If I'm going to discuss their recent history, and Devin Booker's playing at an all-star level, as we saw. Chris Paul is showing his leadership on and off the court, and I think DeAndre Ayton has the potential to be one of the best centers in the NBA. And if you're going to learn from how to do a pick and roll with anyone, Chris Paul is very, very high on my list right now in the NBA, and who I would trust to develop a really good center. And so, I could see this Phoenix Suns team making a run in the West. Hopefully, they're not a very good regular season team and not as much in the playoffs. I know Chris Paul has never had that much playoff success, but I could definitely see this team under Monty Williams. They have so much fire especially with Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges. These guys haven't made the playoffs, especially Devin Booker. He's been a part of Phoenix for a good five years now, and he hasn't made the playoffs once. And I know they wanted to turn that around, and they're really showing that they can this season. So we'll see how they do in the playoffs. Right now, they probably go up against a team like the Mavericks, the Nuggets, the Warriors, or the Spurs. I think it'd be an interesting matchup against most of those teams when it comes to a 7-game series. But the Suns are hot right now in the NBA, and a lot of that credit's got to go to Chris Paul and just his impact on the court. Because if you look at Phoenix Suns, they probably have some of the greatest point guards to ever play the game play for that franchise. Kevin Johnson, very, very underrated player in NBA history, does not get talked about enough. Steve Nash, 2-time MVP. Although maybe you could say that one of them wasn't deserved, as that is a little bit, talked about.
He deserved both. End of story.
Fair enough. And you got also guys like Jason Kidd, who just very underappreciated player, and even a guy like Sean Marion, who doesn't get talked about at all anymore in NBA history, but his defensive presence was incredible for some of those teams. So don't
forget about, I know you haven't mentioned him yet, Dennis Johnson. Finals MVP in Seattle, went to Phoenix, I think the year after or 2 years after it was, and played most of his prime in Phoenix then, and led them to a couple playoff runs. So, ton of great guards in Phoenix history. I know they haven't had as much success with the big men, although Barkley was obviously one of the best power forwards of all time, and then Stoudemire was pretty good in the mid 2000s for them, but no really electric centers in Phoenix history. So we'll see if Ayton can be the first one to be that kind of player for them.
Exactly. Now going from a franchise that does not have a ring due to the GOAT himself and Michael Jordan, we're going to the team that is known for not having a ring because of Michael Jordan, and that is the Utah Jazz, sitting at the 18th spot in our rankings. They had the Karl Malone, John Stockton days. They've been in the media a lot because of stuff that LeBron James said about that playing with them and video games and everything during the All-Star draft. Pretty funny stuff. I believe that this is the highest win percentage in the regular season we've had so far up until this point, sitting at a 54.1% win percentage in the regular season, being around since 74-75, making it to the playoffs 29 years. They had the back-to-back NBA Finals that everyone knows as just the Michael Jordan domination over the Utah Jazz. Playoffs win percentage of 46.2%. And there's also some underrated players that have played for this franchise, including, Mark Eaton, one of the tallest players in NBA history. You got Pistol Pete Maravich, Truck Robinson, someone I feel like you're going to want to mention, Darren Williams, and then even present day, you got Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert and this incredible Utah Jazz team. So let's talk a little bit about their history.
The entirety of Utah Jazz history can pretty much be described in two players, John Stockton and Karl Malone. Those two literally defined over 20 years of Utah Jazz history, just about 20 years of Utah Jazz history in their 47 seasons, which is almost half. And pretty much all of their success comes when those two players were there. They made the playoffs in every single season with Stockton or Malone on the team. That is very impressive mark. I think it was, it was 20 consecutive seasons they made the playoffs with one of the two of them on the team. And in that time, they made the finals twice and lost both. They also made the Western Conference Finals 2 other times. which makes 4 out of the 5 times they've made it to the conference finals in franchise history was with either Stockton, Malone, or both. And then outside of those two, the Jazz have been not very good, honestly. It's just the fact that those two make up such a big portion of their history, and they were so successful and so dominant in those 20 years together. In my opinion, still the greatest duo of all time, even though they weren't able to win a ring together, just for longevity purposes. You can't mention Stockton without Malone, and you can't mention Malone without Stockton, because they literally go hand in hand. And the Utah Jazz go right in with those two. So they've been, since, other than those two, when those two were around, they've been consistently about a first-round exit since then. They've had a couple years where they made the conference semifinals and even one Western Conference Finals appearance, but overall not the most successful team without them. But still more so than any other team that's never won a championship before.
Exactly. And real quick, while we're talking about the Utah Jazz, might as well go back and promote the Instagram page. Zach has been doing his series where he posts the best player from every single season of a franchise. Here's the Utah Jazz. You talk about longevity with Karl Malone and John Stockton. Starting at 86-87 right here, Karl Malone had a fantastic year. Then Stockton, then Malone. And then you go to 5 straight years of Malone, another year of Stockton, 6 more years of Karl Malone, which all of these could possibly be debated on how great John Stockton was during this time. And then 2 more years before AK-47, a very underrated NBA player, comes through and takes that spot. But, I mean, this Utah Jazz team, man.
If you keep that up, go back to the start where Malone and Stockton are, right? So you look at that. Stockton joined the team in 1983-84, which was the Jazz first playoff appearance in franchise history. They had never made the playoffs before that point. And Stockton joined the team in 1983-84 as the backup point guard. From then on, they made the playoffs every single season until that last season where Malone's last season, 2002-2003. Stockton's final season was the year before. So they each had 1 year without the other. And they made the playoffs every single season. And then as soon as Malone was gone, they stopped consistently making the playoffs again. One other thing I want to mention about that graphic, though, if you go back to the start of where Stockton was, his last appearance there is 2001-2002. His first one, I'm sorry, I meant Malone. Malone's last one was 2002-2003. You go back to his first one, 86-87. I will be very impressed if we have another person on this list that has 2 appearances that spaced out between one another, being the best player in that franchise's history in 1986-87, and also doing the same thing in 2002-2003, nearly 16 years later. Very impressive on Malone's part.
It really is. Yeah, so there's real quick promotion of the Instagram page and showing this is one of the pure examples of how longevity really can show greatness in the NBA. Moving on, unless you got anything else to say about the Utah Jazz.
Michael Jordan.
Chuck Robinson a little bit.
Chuck Robinson was a GOAT in the late 70s, early 80s. No, I'm just gonna say that I think those late 90s Jazz teams are also right up in the conversation of greatest teams to never win a title before. Like I said, with the Suns and the Warriors, the Jazz are right there too. 2 consecutive years where they were easily the most dominant team in the Western Conference, and they had to go up against Michael Jordan in the finals. And even in the regular season, especially 97-98, people were saying Jazz were the best team in the league. And Jordan disproved that. So, but yeah, I got to put a ton of respect on those Jazz teams because, again, if it wasn't for the GOAT, the Jazz have 2 championships, and they're at least 4 or 5 spots higher on this list, if not more.
Yeah, moving on to the second team that we'll talk about in today's podcast, with just 1 NBA championship under their belt, led by one of the greatest runs in NBA history. I know we talked about, the Toronto Raptors playoff run and how incredible that was, being the 2 seed. Mm-hmm. The Dallas Mavericks 2011 championship run with Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Kidd, Shawn Marion, Tyson Chandler, one of the greatest NBA championship runs that we've ever seen. And that's moving us on to our 17th spot, talking about the Dallas Mavericks, a team that's right over 500 on their win percentage in their career. That could change this season depending on how their record goes. And right now they're on a 9-2 win. They're 9-2 in their last 11 games after a really slow start. Present day for the Mavericks, but making the playoffs 22 times, being a team since 1980, having a 46% win percentage in the playoffs, And, there's great players that played for this team. We talked about Jason Kidd and Steve Nash for the Suns. You got to throw them in there with the Mavericks as well. Dirk Nowitzki being the most popular one, and having one of the greatest young players in NBA history right now, Luka Doncic. Let's hear what you have to say about the Dallas Mavericks.
Absolutely. I actually don't have much to say about them because I think the Mavericks are one of the most mediocre franchises in NBA history, and I think that's characterized perfectly by having them at 17. But what I think is also interesting is they're the third, at least we have them ranked as the third worst team to have actually won a championship, only ahead of the Raptors, who are a very young franchise, and then the Kings, who is, here's our weekly Kings plug here, the worst successful franchise in NBA history, and undisputedly. So, so that keeps the Mavericks pretty low. Surprisingly, I know a lot of people probably expect them to be higher because the Mavericks have been, at least in our lifetime, normally a pretty successful franchise. I mean, they had Dirk Nowitzki running it for them for about almost 20 years, and they were a consistent playoff team throughout his entire run there. He's another one where almost an entire team's franchise is linked to really just one player, where if Dirk wasn't a part of this Mavericks franchise, they're probably bottom 5, honestly. They would not have gotten anywhere without him. Very influential to their team's history. But other than him, they've only made about, I think, 6 playoff appearances outside of Dirk in their franchise history. So obviously that doesn't discredit them, but they haven't really been able to put together multiple runs of being good. Where a lot of these teams even below them, the Suns we talked about, where the Barkley teams were great and then the Nash teams were great, or even the Pacers we talked about with the Reggie Miller teams and the Paul George teams. The Mavericks have really just had the Dirk teams. But what saves them is, unlike those other teams that we just mentioned, Dirk was able to win a chip, and he also did so in one of the hardest playoff runs of all time, which we've talked about extensively before, so I won't go too in-depth on that. But, very impressive for Dirk, very impressive for the Mavericks. The 2000s, they were a top 3 or 4 team in the Western Conference consistently. So you got to put some respect on their name there. But otherwise, a very mediocre franchise.
Hey, if you're ever going to be bad during a point in NBA history, being bad during the 90s was probably the best time to be bad, because this team, if they were successful, probably still would not have won a championship, having to go up against, Jordan for a little bit. And then in the 2 years he was out of there, Hakeem Olajuwon and his incredible playoff runs. But they were solid in the 1980s. But if we're going to talk about their future right now, this team is looking to really jump up this list in the 2020s, as Luka Doncic is looking like a player that any team, probably the number one player that a team would want to build around if they had a future. Him or Giannis is up there, and we'll talk about Giannis in a little bit. They got Kristaps Porzingis running the floor with him. Who knows what's going to happen with that? There's been some trade rumors, but with his young self and his chemistry next to Luka, I'd be shocked if they actually did make a move. But Mark Cuban's done a fantastic job being an owner of this team. You could see he's a very underrated aspect of this Mavericks history, and just how incredible you could really see ownership is in a franchise. And without Mark Cuban at these 2000s, this franchise definitely would not be where they are right now. You got anything else to say about the Mavericks?
Oh, absolutely. What's interesting is, since they won the finals in 2011, this team hasn't won a playoff series since then. So I don't know what there's to say about that. If that team was maybe a bit of a fluke, maybe just had a miracle run and weren't able to produce in any other years besides that. And I don't know what it says, but the Mavericks just have not been very successful since then. Just a bunch of first-round exits are missing the playoffs. So we'll see if Luka and KP can get them back on track in the next decade.
Exactly. Moving from one team with one NBA championship, one of the greatest playoff runs of all time, to another team with arguably the greatest playoff run in NBA history, along with the greatest championship win in NBA history, which I hate to say being a Golden State Warriors fan. We're moving on to the Cleveland Cavaliers and their one NBA championship, obviously coming in 2016 when they let the Golden State Warriors blow a 3-1 lead, and LeBron James wore those T-shirt sleeved hood jerseys and came all the way back down 3-1 and ended up winning the ring with Kyrie Irving when he was still a respected player in the NBA. They had Kevin Love at the time, and obviously the second greatest player in NBA history. But you look back at the rest of this franchise, they made the finals only with LeBron James And they are 1-for-5 as a franchise if you really look at it. Being around since 1970, they've made the playoffs 22 years. Making the finals 5 times out of 22 years kind of just goes to show that without LeBron James, this franchise might even be up there for the worst franchise in NBA history.
Yeah.
They also had great players in their past, including Mark Price, Larry Nance, the Big Z, if anyone knows, Ilgauskas, Austin Carr, and a lot of other good players. But without LeBron James, where would this Cleveland Cavaliers team stand?
Well, yeah, they haven't made the playoffs since I think 1998 without LeBron. LeBron has made it 9 times in the I think 12 seasons he's been there, or 10 seasons. I can't remember if he missed it 2 or 3 times to start out his career. I think it was 3, but no, it was 2. It was 2. I'm sorry. So yeah, LeBron has in the last 22 seasons, LeBron has been there for 11 of them. And all 9 of their playoff appearances has come when LeBron was there. While the other 11, he was not there. They have not made the playoffs, which shows really just how important LeBron has been for this franchise. I mean, if you look back, though, this team wasn't that bad. I mean, they had a rough stretch in the 70s, but throughout the 80s and the 90s, the Cavs were a consistently solid team in the Eastern Conference. Definitely not a mark of one of the more poorer franchises. But yeah, they definitely didn't elevate themselves into this tier, this middle tier of 10 until LeBron came around and brought them to the finals multiple times. That said, I have a feeling we won't be seeing the Cavaliers win another NBA Finals probably in our lifetimes. I don't know if that's just a weird hunch I have. I just don't think I just think the Cavaliers are one of those NBA poverty franchises where you just won't see them be a consistently successful team. They would need another player like LeBron James to come through and really carry them because as an organization, they've been very messy in the front office, not really been able to put good teams together. There's been a lot of chemistry issues in the past. They get superstars and lose them. I know Kyrie Irving was an instance of that where they had a superstar and then some chemistry issues led to him leaving. So there's a lot of factors there in Cleveland that points to this franchise maybe being at 16 being a little too high. But you got to give some credit to LeBron James and being able to bring them in 2016. Although the path to the finals was one of the easiest ever, I think that finals performance was ridiculous. And definitely, if you're looking at purely the NBA Finals, probably the best finals performances of all time in Cleveland.
Yeah, I hate to say that. Me being a Warriors fan, I root against the Cleveland Cavaliers every single year in those 5 years where they went at it. And it was crazy. That was one of the greatest stretches, in my opinion, that we've ever seen of just actual rivals going up against each other every season. The Steph Curry, who had Golden State Warriors against.
You liked it because it was one of your teams. Everyone else in the NBA fan base hated it unless they were a Warriors fan or a LeBron fan.
That is true. So for me, I enjoyed it. For you, I could understand why you didn't. But the Cleveland Cavaliers sitting right at the middle of our rankings. So now we're going to get into our second half of the rankings, which is pretty exciting to think about. And going from one Eastern Conference team to another Eastern Conference team, the Washington Wizards, starting in early 1960s. They only have one NBA title, which came in 1978, yet they've made the finals 4 times. 29 years they've made the playoffs. They have one of the worst win percentages I believe we've talked about so far in this podcast at 45%, playoff win percentage of 42%. But their greatest players like Wes Unseld, Elvin Hayes, Gilbert Arenas, and John Wall, and Bradley Beal as we speak, and even Moses Malone for a little bit. What are your thoughts on the Wizards franchise? Why do you have them above teams like the Cavs and the Mavericks?
Well, to be fair, since this team has become the Wizards, definitely not the Wizards themselves as a team name, not really where they were successful. The Washington Bullets, on the other hand, that's where Washington really made their money. I was just looking at it. Yeah, they've only made the Wizards. Washington as a franchise has only made the playoffs 9 times in the last 32 years. So they've been one of the most least successful teams in the Eastern Conference since 1988. But you look before then, and I mean, what we do here is we don't discriminate in eras here at Backcourt Press. We take all eras into account. The Bullets were dominant in the 70s and 80s. Particularly the 70s, man, where they won their one championship. Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld, one of the best combination of big men we've ever seen in NBA history. Personally, I'm a little tangent here. I think Elvin Hayes got totally robbed of Finals MVP in that Finals that they won. Unseld was great, but got to put a little respect on my boy Elvin Hayes because he really balled out in those Finals. But I mean, that championship team was spectacular. I mean, they were not a very good regular season team, low seed coming into the playoffs, and they just kind of rolled through everyone and got to the Finals against the Sonics, and it was a very, very fun series. Two dominant teams of the late 70s going at it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a huge fan of some of those early Bullets teams. The Wizards, you might complain that they're a little high. I don't know. Maybe they are, but they were really, really something back in the 70s and the 80s. And I think when you take into the full account of franchise history, they belong right here in the middle.
We don't discriminate eras unless we're talking about the Sacramento Kings, and we always discriminate against them. But if we're going to talk present-day Washington Wizards, they made the blockbuster trade in the offseason to trade for Russell Westbrook. Thinking everyone was saying, you know what, Paul George was an MVP candidate when next to Russell Westbrook, maybe Bradley Beal could take that next step. Although he's an all-star starter, the Wizards right now are sitting at 14-20, and I believe the 12th seed in the East. They made a little bit of a push. They went on a hot streak, but you could see that when they started off the year very, very slow, and their chemistry wasn't there, their defense wasn't there. It's really taking an impact on the team. I'm hoping that this team could sneak into that 8th seed in the playoffs, but when I look at teams above them, including the Hawks, Pacers, Raptors, and Hornets, even the Knicks and the Heat, I don't really know how much better they are than those teams. They don't really have any persistent big men. We just talked about their history with great big men. Right now, they're relying on Thomas Bryant, who got injured and is out for the season, to be their center. So now they're relying on Robin Lopez to be that Wes Unseld type player. And they're also relying on Davis Bertans to shoot. And I'm sorry, but that is not going to work out for you when you have got players like Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal who just have to carry the load of this team. And their defensive struggles really show. That, to me, they have one of the worst coaches in the NBA right now in Scott Brooks. I've talked about this before. I'll talk about it again. Scott Brooks, to me, has just been one of the most underwhelming coaches we've seen this year, and I believe that he should probably lose his job if this team doesn't start winning games again recently, because they were on such a hot streak. I remember I made a post on Backcourt Press talking about how the NBA is a game of runs, and the Wizards were right there because although they started off the year slow, they were on a hot streak. Now they're back onto a little bit of a slow streak. So we'll see if this team can sneak into the playoffs. With Bradley Beal being an all-star starter, in my opinion, extremely well-deserved. One of the best all-around scorers. He's such a 3-level scorer. I know he's known for mainly being a shooter, but what he can do driving to the lane, his mid-range game is one of the best in the NBA. And I think Bradley Beal could possibly go down as one of the greatest Washington Wizards players in their history, in their franchise history.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I'm just looking at overall the whole list. I think when you're looking at the three teams we just talked about, the Mavericks, the Cavaliers, and the Wizards, those are your three franchises. I put them in like their own little tier together because they are heavily carried by their championship runs. And if you took away each of these franchises one championship, they fall right back into the middle of the 20s where they are probably looked at as a very, very unsuccessful franchise overall. But all three of them had one very, very good chip. I know all three of them were underdogs in their championships. I know we mentioned the Mavericks in 2011 beat a bunch of good teams. Obviously, LeBron beat the 73-9 Warriors. And then obviously Elvin Hayes and Wes Unseld's Wizards were one of the worst teams entering the playoffs, and they made a pretty miracle run that not as many people know about. Might highlight that one on Backcourt Press soon enough, but we'll see. Anyways, you can put those three in any order, and I really wouldn't argue with you. I think we're really getting to the point now where there's a pretty big jump between 15 and 14, at least in my opinion, where at least 14 through 11, I think, are also all pretty interchangeable. We're starting to get to the franchises that have been consistently successful. They all have one championship too, but unlike the last three we talked about, these teams are not only just teams that have won championships, but have been pretty consistently successful overall.
And moving on from 15 to 14, going from a team that's unsuccessful this season to a team that's very successful this season. The Milwaukee Bucks, starting in 1968-1969, having one NBA title right after they were created into the NBA in 1971, but making the finals twice. But they've made the playoffs 33 years out of their time being a franchise, which is a very impressive accolade. And if we're going to look at players, we just talked about how dominant the big men of the Washington Wizards were, but we're talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Giannis Antetokounmpo being the two big men that really run this list, and then great guards like Oscar Robertson, Sidney Moncrief, Ray Allen, and Michael Redd. Players like that have really carried this franchise. They have right under a 52% win percentage and just under a 48% playoff win percentage. Let me hear what you have to say. You said there was a little bit of a space in between the Wizards and the Bucks.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, when you look at the Bucks franchise history, not only do they have their one championship with Kareem and Oscar Robertson, they've had more. I mean, overall, they've had better players in their franchise history too. I mean, I know the Wizards, Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes, we talked about. I mean, they've had John Wall, Gilbert Arenas, a couple other Moses Malone, a couple other superstars. But I mean, you look at the Bucks roster; it's loaded. I mean, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Oscar Robertson, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Ray Allen, Marcus Johnson. I mean, the list, Bob Dandridge, the list goes on and on. And not only that, but the Bucks have been able to put together successful teams in almost every single decade, which is, to me, a very impressive feat. I think I talked about this last time too. But in the 70s, it was Kareem and Oscar. In the 80s, they were pretty consistently a top 3 or 4 team in the East with Sidney Moncrief. The 90s, they struggled. I'll give them that. The 2000s, it was Glenn Robinson and Ray Allen led them to the Eastern Conference Finals in the early 2000s. And then in the later 2000s, you had Brandon Jennings leading the team. It was actually decent for a time being. And then in the 2010s, you got Giannis Antetokounmpo and Chris Middleton leading them. So no matter what, the Bucks teams always finds a way to stay competitive. They're always in it. They're always one of the better teams. And I don't think you could ever classify Milwaukee as a poverty franchise like you could with maybe the Cavaliers or the Wizards, where not as successful. The Bucks are pretty much always up there. I mean, they've made it to the Eastern Conference Finals 8 times, while they've only advanced to the finals twice and won 1 chip. 8 times is a pretty good mark, especially considering it's in 4 different decades.
Yeah, I mean, Kareem came into the league, won Rookie of the Year, and then won the MVP the next 3 years in a row, and that just shows how dominant those early 70s and late 60s teams were with the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, we talked about Oscar Robertson and Kareem, obviously, when we did our top 10s list in each position, and top 15 of all time, because they both had to be talked about when we threw those in there. But if we're going to talk about present day Milwaukee Bucks, they're sitting at the 3 seed right now, and I know we talked about teams like the Sixers and the Nets being as good as theirs. The Milwaukee Bucks are right there behind. We just saw Giannis have a perfect all-star game, shooting perfect 16 for 16 and 3 for 3 for 3. It's pretty impressive for Bucks fans. I don't think anyone really expected that, but to me, the Milwaukee Bucks really want to make themselves a contender. Mike Budenholzer cannot be your head coach. I've seen the plays that he draws up, their clutch time, just awareness on the court. They looked for Giannis to be a mid-range shooter a lot of the times in the clutch, and he's Mike Budenholzer has been one of the greatest regular season coaches of all time. We've seen that in his days with the Atlanta Hawks, how they were the 1 seed, but not really that talked about when it came to the playoffs. And the Milwaukee Bucks, last year, a lot of fans had high hopes on them to possibly make the playoffs and make even the championship in that Eastern Conference. And they fell 4-1 in the second round to the Miami Heat, who obviously went on to make it to the NBA Finals, but very underwhelming playoff team in the Milwaukee Bucks in recent decades. But Giannis playing at MVP caliber layer as no one's really talking about. I made a post about that in Backcourt Press on Instagram. Go check that out. They just made they kind of gave up their entire future to trade for Drew Holiday. Chris Middleton's still playing at his all-star level and just playing very consistent. What do you think the Bucks have to do to possibly put themselves in championship contention this season?
They need a James Harden or Kevin Durant injury. I mean, I think I've said this before, and I will continually say it until the end of the season. I don't think anyone in the East is well equipped enough to beat the Nets in 7 games. I don't care how they're currently constructed. I don't care how well the Bucks are playing. I don't care how well the Sixers are playing. God forbid, I don't care how well the Celtics are playing. There's no one beating the Nets in 7 games. Giannis can try. I mean, I don't know. Speaking of the Knicks, a bit of a side tangent. I'll go on for 1 minute. But I saw a side-by-side comparison yesterday of LeBron James's stats with Julius Randle's stats. But they were anonymous. You didn't know whose was who. And you're looking, and player B, who was Randle, was right there with player A, who was LeBron. If you're looking at both regular stats and advanced stats, which I thought was just amazing that you could have comparable stats between LeBron and Julius Randle. Shows how good Julius Randle is. Moving on, the Bucks, they would need a miracle. They would need a miracle this year. I know they've been playing well. Giannis is good. Drew Holiday's doing what he always does. Chris Middleton, I think, is having a very underrated season this year. But in the end, it's Kyrie, James Harden, and Durant. I think a lot would need to go in the Bucks' direction in terms of luck in that series for them to be able to pull it out against the Nets.
I completely agree. It's going to be an interesting way to see, if Giannis is going to regret signing that Supermax extension. I know a lot of people are expecting him to wait till the offseason to possibly re-sign with the Bucks and possibly look into signing with teams like the Raptors, the Heat, the Warriors were talked about for a while. Gosh, I'm so sad that that's not going to happen anymore. But it would have been fun to see. But yet, in a smaller market, quote unquote, in Milwaukee, the Bucks have been a very, very good team throughout their career, and that's why we have them ranked at 14. So, never that great, sure, obviously in their early years, but always very, very, very good. So
and really, I know I said that they were in this tier with the other teams, and really the thing that keeps them at the back of this tier is finals appearances, and that's really the one thing. The Bucks have not made the finals since 1975, which is a pretty poor mark as a franchise. It's been however many, I can't really do math, but it's been like 45 years since then. Not very impressive, but again, the Bucks have been pretty consistently successful, and they have that one championship. So definitely belong in the top half of franchises.
Exactly. Moving on from one team that has one championship to another team that has a championship way farther back than even the early Milwaukee Bucks is the Atlanta Hawks, becoming a franchise in 1949-1950, winning their only championship in 1958, making the finals 4 times, twice in the late 50s and twice in the early 60s. Yet they made the playoffs 46 times throughout their career. I believe that's the highest that we've seen and highest that we might see up until we get into the top 10, having a win percentage of just over 49%, a playoff win percentage of 43%, and having incredible players throughout their franchise history, including Bob Pettit, Dominique Wilkins, Lou Hudson, Joe Johnson, Lenny Wilkins, Woody, and they've always been a great.
We'll see that.
You go.
I was gonna say we'll see this soon. I got my Hawks series post coming out as soon as this podcast is over. I'll be posting it, so go check that out soon. Well, actually, part 1. It's gonna be a 2-parter because Hawks franchise history is really extensive. So.
It is. But, the Atlanta Hawks sitting at 13, why do you have them ahead of teams like the Milwaukee Bucks?
I just want to throw a fun fact out there first that I thought was pretty cool. The Hawks have the most second-round playoff losses in NBA history with 24. They've lost in the second round 24 times before. For reference, second place, the only other team in the 20s is the Sixers at 20.
That's more than half of their playoff appearances that they've lost in the second round.
Yeah, they lose in the second round. I mean, you said, how many times did you say they made it? Was it 46?
46 times.
46, yeah. They've lost in the first or second round in 41 of those. Wow. So out of those 46 playoff appearances, they've only made it to the West. They've only made it to the Eastern Conference Finals in 5 of the 46, which is not a great mark. Of course, they ended up advancing to the finals in 4 of them, but only have the 1 championship. And again, when you're looking into it as a franchise history, all of those finals were in the 1950s. So again, I like to reward points for different periods of being successful. The Hawks really had their most dominant phase in the 1950s, and since then haven't made much of a dent. Have never made the finals since then. Another reason why they're with the Bucks in the same little tier. One period of being a championship contending team, and they haven't been there since. But overall, when you're looking at Hawks history, they've had a bunch of little patches of being playoff contenders. I know we had the Joe Johnson, Josh Smith days of the 2000s, and then the Jeff Teague, Al Horford, Paul Millsap days, 2010s. Sorry, obviously Dominique in the 80s, and then Dikembe in the 90s. Lou Hudson and Pistol Pete in the 70s. They've been competitive in every single era. Unfortunately, they just haven't been able to advanced through to the finals since Bob Pettit. So that's really the one knock against them.
Yeah, talking about the Atlanta Hawks in current NBA talk, this team was a team that both of us were very, very high on going into the season. I believe we both had them as a 7th seed in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
And so far they've been very disappointing, sitting at a record of 16-20. Players, they signed, Danilo Gallinari, Bogdan Bogdanovic, who we thought would have a way bigger impact, and yet Bogdanovic is barely even getting rotational minutes. He's seems to be getting minutes behind Cam Reddish and Kevin Huerter, which to me is a little bit absurd. And Gallinari is finally starting to step it up as their sixth man. But if you really think about it, they just fired their head coach. It seems like they really did need a change in scenery. And Lloyd Pierce getting fired, I think, could be a very changing thing for this team. And Trae Young's averaging 27 points and 9 assists and did not make the All-Star game. And I think that just comes to shows how unreliable he is on defense, because if he was a competent defender, he would be an all-star lock. And if the Hawks were doing a little bit better, maybe it would be as well, maybe more talked about. But I'd have to give you, and we talked about this in one of our previous podcasts, you got to give the nod to a guy like Ben Simmons, who's just as good of a playmaker, not obviously a shooter. Their play styles are very different, but the defensive levels are exact opposites. I mean, Ben Simmons probably the top defensive guard, and Trae Young's probably the worst defensive guard that we've seen. But the Atlanta Hawks are looking to sneak into the playoffs. They've got developing players in DeAndre Hunter, someone I'm very high on, Cam Reddish, and then Clint Capela's looking like a very solid big man for this team. And John Collins, what do you think this team needs to do to put it together to make the playoffs this season? Because they've been all over the place so far.
I mean, that's a really tough one. I think they need to get healthy, first of all. They need all of their guys playing. They need everyone on the court. And then they just need to put it together, man. I think chemistry is one of the biggest issues with this team right now. Because you look on paper, and they have the players, especially in the Eastern Conference right now. They have the players to advance to the playoffs, right? These teams they're competing with are not very good. I mean, the Chicago Bulls aren't great. I mean, the Pacers aren't great.
They're just injury prone.
The Hornets aren't great. I mean, yeah, these aren't really talented teams they're competing with. I think the Hawks on paper are better than pretty much all the other teams they're competing with. It just comes down to the chemistry and the defense, because, like it or not, Trae Young on defense hurts them a lot. And their secondary guard, who they're normally playing with, Kevin Huerter, isn't really helping much either. I know when they have Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter on the floor, those can provide much better forwards at the defensive spots than at the guards. But overall, man, this Hawks team is not playing up to par that I expected them to, and I think it has a lot to do with the chemistry on the floor and the defensive impact of the guards.
When we had our off-season rankings, when you would give every team a grade, I'm pretty sure you gave the Atlanta Hawks a pretty high grade because we thought that their signings would be great. And I think everyone's still expecting, when we saw Trae Young, and obviously we know how rough of a defender he is, we saw them sign players like Rajon Rondo and Chris Dunn. And we both of us really, really like those signings because Chris Dunn brings that defensive guard play that Trae Young doesn't have, and Rondo brings that leadership that Trae Young is still developing. And they haven't even really touched the floor yet for this Hawks team.
Yeah, I said at the end of last season and going into this season that for 2 years I've given Trae Young a pass for not making the playoffs, obviously, because it takes time for adjustment for young players to get into a system. Obviously, I mean, LeBron took 2 years. I mean, it always takes time for players to get into a system and be comfortable enough to get into the playoffs. But it's his third year now, and he had the players around him. He's in a very weak conference. And I said going into this season, I said, Trae Young will not get a pass this year. I said, if he does not lead the Hawks to the playoffs, then there is something going on there, and they need to evaluate it next season. And I'm sticking by that. And I think Trae Young really needs to get this team together. If he's going to be the leader on a playoff team, if he's going to want to solidify himself as a top, right now, I don't even know if I call him a top 8 point guard. If he wants to solidify himself in that tier, he needs to advance into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, this team, hopefully the firing of Lloyd Pierce really will bring this team some energy that they just haven't looked like they've had so far. And with all the new additions and injuries really affecting their chemistry, hopefully they can start to put it together in this time after the All-Star break. Because really, if you look at all the teams ahead of them, going up to even the 4 seed at the Boston Celtics, they're only 2 games over 500. The Hawks only sit 3 games behind the 4 seed. And so this mid-tier Eastern Conference team underneath the Sixers, Nets, and Bucks really is up for grabs. So possibly if Trae Young can prove himself, that might put this Hawks team. And if Trae Young can have a great rest of his career, as we both hope he does, I think that could really solidify this Hawks team possibly to be into the top 10 of our rankings of all time. But moving on from one franchise who has one championship to another franchise with one championship, I feel like that's been kind of the run-through with these mid-tier teams, just one championship and a couple appearances, is the Portland Trailblazers sitting at our 12th spot. Their inaugural year was 1970-1971. Their only NBA championship comes in 1977, but they made the finals 3 times in 2 different decades, one time in 77 when they won, and the other times in 1990 and 1992. Yet in their, what is this, just over 50 years of being a franchise.
They celebrated 50 years last year.
Oh, sweet. They made the playoffs 36 times out of those 50 times, and they have a playoff win percentage not that great, of just under 44%, but their regular season win percentage is 53.6%. And, they've got great players in their past, like Clyde Drexler. Obviously, present day, we've got more Damian Lillard and LaMarcus Aldridge. We got injury-prone players in Brandon Roy, and the greatest Portland Trailblazer, according to Zach, the greatest center of all time, Bill Walton, baby. But so
Bill Walton, baby.
Give you a little talk about the Portland Trailblazers. Let's hear what you got to say about that.
Well, another interesting fact I know I just mentioned for the Hawks, 24 second-round appearances, losses most of all time. Trailblazers hold the record for most first-round losses of all time, also with 24, which is, again, you said they made it 36 times, so 2 out of every 3 times they make the playoffs, they're getting knocked out in the first round. And yeah, you just look on paper, the Hawks are probably looking a little more better than the Blazers on paper. But I ended up giving the edge to the Blazers because, unlike the Hawks, they were able to do it in different decades. And another interesting fact I like about the Blazers too is they're the first team to ever win the NBA Finals in their first playoff appearance. They missed the playoffs their first 6 years as a franchise. And then in 76-77, Bill Walton and Maurice Lucas led them all the way, and they won it all, which is another very impressive feat. And since then, they did win it that one season. They then only missed the playoffs once in the next 25 years. Wow. So the Blazers have been a consistently successful franchise. They had a little period in the mid-2000s where they missed it for a couple of years, but since then they've been right back on track with Aldridge, Roy, and then Lillard. So, you look at that, since that one finals win, since they won the one championship, they've only missed the playoffs 7 times since 77, which is insane. I think that's a mark of a very consistently successful franchise, and I will take that as a team that makes the playoffs almost every single year consistently. I will take that over an inconsistently successful team like the Hawks, where the Hawks will have, maybe they made the finals more, and maybe they've made it to the second round more, but they've also had a ton of years where they don't even make the playoffs. So that's really why I'm giving it to the Blazers. And then once again, getting screwed over by Michael Jordan, man. That 92 Blazers team was a very special team, and I thought Clyde would be able to lead them all the way. But then, again, Michael Jordan came through and said no.
Yeah, another fun fact about Portland, they've only recorded a sub-30 win season 3 times in their history franchise. So showing that they've just never really been a bottom team. And one of those times, something that really could have changed this franchise around, was when they drafted Greg Oden at the first overall pick, right ahead of Kevin Durant. If they would have drafted Kevin Durant, it would have been a lot different. This Trailblazers team could possibly even be in the top 10. But I know when we were talking about the players before I go into our present day talk, we were talking about Bill Walton. Zach and I started a series on Backcourt Press Instagram page, appreciation posts and why these players deserve more respect. And Zach created one for Bill Walton, talking about his legacy as a player and how incredible he was, especially for the Portland Trailblazers. So just wanted to shout out the Instagram page again. Make sure to go follow that. But going into present-day Blazers, this was a team that I had sitting just outside the playoffs when I did my preseason rankings because I really underrated the fact that Damian Lillard is Damian Lillard. And although I am not a big Damian Lillard fan, just for the pure fact that he gets rated above Steph Curry sometimes, I don't even think he's above Kyrie Irving. I know that's a little bit up for debate. But this Blazers team sitting at the 5 seed, and Damian Lillard is the only reason why they've missed Jusuf Nurkic for most of the season. They've missed C.J. McCollum for most of the season. Robert Covington has not really looked like the efficient Robert Covington. I believe at one point in the season he was the most inefficient team or player in the entire league. But Damian Lillard just makes players around him better. And he looks to be one of the greatest leaders in the NBA that we've seen. And if we're talking deep range, dead-eye, he's right up there with Steph Curry and some of the greatest long-range shooters of all time. I mean, we all saw it in the All-Star game when him and Steph went back and forth in half-court shots, and it was one of the coolest sequences I think I've ever seen in an All-Star game. But this team is possibly going to be a mid-tier team. I don't know how much I would take them in a playoff series over teams like the Lakers, the Clippers, the Phoenix Suns, even possibly the Warriors or the Mavericks, due to the fact that we don't know where Jusuf Nurkic is going to stand returning from injury, and they really can't rely on Enes Kanter on the defensive side of the ball. I know I believe they're still waiting for Zach Collins to come back from injury. So when we're talking present day Blazers, they just deal with so many injuries that really brings this team down. Because if they really had a healthy squad, I know we both agree on this, that C.J. McCollum is arguably a better playoff player than Damian Lillard. Just Damian Lillard always tends to hit that last-second shot. Jusuf Nurkic in the bubble, coming off screens, he started to shoot threes and knock them down. The confidence he played with was fantastic. This team can get healthy. I don't know what team's going to want to go up against them in those first couple of rounds.
No, absolutely. I agree with you on that. And you got to mention, too, Carmelo Anthony has been playing great this year. Got to represent a little Syracuse, but I think Melo's playing better this year than he did last year. So that was another great signing for them.
His efficiency, he was disrespected for so long in the NBA, and then next thing you know, the Blazers give him a chance when they kind of did need forward play. Next thing you know, he's really pulling through and playing his role incredibly. He's hitting that mid-range shot.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's sometimes I remember he had a really big fourth quarter, and everyone was like, "It's prime Melo, baby." It was great to see just his impact on the court. And I think if any team was going to give him the chance, and I'd like him to be successful, it's right next to Damian Lillard, one of the most underappreciated players in the NBA. And I can even say that even though I underappreciate him as an NBA player, just because, as much as I want to say Steph Curry is better than him, the Warriors right now are a very unsuccessful team. And I don't know which supporting cast I'd rather have with the Blazers injuries, Blazers without CJ or Nurkic, or Steph Curry's, the Wiggins and Draymond-led Warriors team. So it's very, very interesting to think about that. But Damian Lillard probably going to go down as a top 3 or 4 Blazer in their franchise history as long as injuries stays there. But yeah.
He's already top 3 in my eyes. I think he's 3 after Walton, Drexler. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm spoiling this. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think Lillard has definitely cemented himself as a top Blazer in franchise history.
And if you also look at the Blazers' history, they've got a couple of those what-if scenarios, including Brandon Roy and Greg Oden. What if these players didn't get injured? What if they could have played out?
Bill Walton.
Even Bill Walton.
Bill Walton doesn't get injured. The Blazers are a dynasty in the late 70s. I mean, come on, man. That's one of the most frustrating things for me as an NBA fan. I mean, I think Bill Walton truly could have had 3 or 4 championships if he never gotten injured.
Exactly. And Brandon Roy, I know he's really talked about when it comes to what ifs, just because his ability to score looked like Kobe Bryant out there on the court with all the different ways that he was able to score. And Greg Oden never really got a chance. And when Kevin Durant goes right behind you, I know Kevin Durant just roasted Greg Oden during the All-Star draft when I believe he was like, Kenny the Jet Smith was like, when have you gone second in a draft? And who went first? And then Kevin Durant was like, some guy that's like 20 years older than me. But, without injuries, we're never going to be able to tell what Greg Oden could have brought to the court. But, moving on to our last team that we're going to talk about, and just barely not cracking the top 10 from going from the Portland Trailblazers we just talked about what ifs. Now we're going to a true what if team. And what if Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Kevin Durant could have stayed together with the Oklahoma City Thunder, winning the NBA Finals in 1979, becoming an NBA team in 1967-68, having 4 Finals appearances, the most recent one being in 2012 when they lost to that Miami Heat team, making the playoffs 32 times in their career, having a 54.3% win percentage and just under 500 when you're talking playoff win percentage. We talk about the Thunder, but really for most of their time they were the Seattle Supersonics, and we're talking best players in history. This team is used a lot in NBA 2K when we're playing all the time because you got Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Gary Payton, Ray Allen, Sean Kemp, even Dennis Johnson for a little bit, a player we talked about, and Spencer Haywood. What do you have to say about the Thunder ranking?
Gus Williams. We'll put some respect on Gus Williams first, because Gus Williams was a bucket back in the day. And, yeah, I mean, talk about these 10 teams are just could be top 10 if Michael Jordan didn't screw with them in the 90s, because we have knocked out pretty much every single team that, other than obviously Johnson, the Lakers, but I don't think that's going to affect their ranking at all, Jordan beating them. We've talked about pretty much every team that's been affected by Michael Jordan. Drexler and the Blazers, Barkley and the Suns, Malone and Stockton and the Jazz, and now Peyton, Kemp, and the Sonics and the Thunder. Man, I mean, if they had won a second one, they've had three. The thing that I think separates the Thunder from the rest of these franchises, and we'll see, the Thunder are the highest team with only one ring. Every other team in the top 10, as we'll see in our next podcast, will have multiple rings. And what separates, to me, I'm going to call them the Sonics or the Thunder. I'll probably go back and forth. Just bear with me here. I think what separates them from these other teams is they've had 3 separate periods where they've been championship contending teams. And they've been finals. They've made it to the finals 3 times in 3 different eras with 3 ridiculously different teams. All 3 who were not even just in the finals, but like they were right there in the finals, like finals contending teams, which you hardly ever get 3 eras of final contending teams from a franchise before. And I know we definitely haven't gotten it from, at least in my opinion, we haven't gotten it from the other teams in this tier, like the Blazers, the Hawks, and the Bucks. So that's what separates the Sonics from the rest of the pack with me. First off, we got to mention the big 3 of Durant, Harden, and Westbrook in the 2010s. I know Harden wasn't quite in his prime yet, but there we go. 2011, 2012, they made it to the NBA Finals, and just barely. LeBron and the Heat had their way with them, but that was a young team, and it looked like in the next couple seasons they'd finally put it together. But they lost Harden, and then they had some consecutive injuries in seasons to Westbrook and Durant, which hurt them in the playoffs. And then a 3-1 lead blown, and Durant was out of there. It's one of the biggest what-if teams of all time, because if you told me 10 years ago that the Thunder wouldn't win a championship with Durant and Westbrook, I would have been like, that's ridiculous. So I think that's truly amazing that they weren't able to win with them, because they had such great teams there. And then going back to the 90s, I already mentioned, man, Gary Payton and Sean Kemp. I'm a huge Gary Payton fan. You're just looking at it right there. 2nd or 1st All-NBA just about every season for 8 straight years. Led them to the finals once. Made it to the Western Conference Finals a couple other times. Actually, they made it to the finals twice, I'm sorry. And then made it to the Western Conference Finals multiple other times. Those were some very good teams. Right up there with probably the Jazz for the best team in the 90s in the West. And then obviously the Rockets with Hakeem too. And then taking it further back to the finals, they only made it to the finals 2 consecutive years. Won one, lost one with the goated Gus Williams, Jack Thikma, and Dennis Johnson teams. They won it in 79, and then they lost it the year before in 78. They had a ton of great players on those teams, like I said, multiple All-Stars. No true superstar, I would say, which I always love teams where it's not really one guy, it's multiple guys who all have a really strong role on the team. Dennis Johnson won Finals MVP, but I think Gus Williams had just as good of a case for it. The Sonics and Thunder have had so many good teams throughout the years. It's really surprising that they've only had one championship.
Exactly. And if we're talking recent Thunder years, it's another team. We talked about the Phoenix Suns earlier in the podcast. I'll talk about the Thunder now to just really show off how incredible Chris Paul's impact is. Chris Paul came onto a team, got traded for Russell Westbrook, who everyone thought was going to be a long-time Oklahoma City Thunder player. And then Chris Paul came out and brought that team that didn't have much to the second round, or to the first round against the Houston Rockets, and put on a show. They almost came out of that series if it wasn't for one little play by Lou Dort and James Harden. That team definitely could have possibly made it to that second round. But if we're going to talk about Oklahoma City Thunder right now, this team is built for success in the next decade. They have young players in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Lou Dort, and Darius Bazley, someone I know you don't really like to talk about that much. But this team, by trading away what they had in Russell Westbrook and then Chris Paul and Paul George for a little bit. They really got one of the greatest futures and draft picks. I believe it's 17 in the next 5 or 6 years, draft picks that they have. And with the way the team's looking right now, they are sitting at 15-21, even over a Sacramento Kings team. Even though it seems like this team was going to be the worst team in the NBA, they're actually putting together some wins. And I think that goes to say that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to be a really, really good player in this league. I just think that this young core really has a lot of potential. And if they could end up trading up in the draft, getting players like Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green possibly in these next upcoming years, this team could really be scary to play against. So who's a player that you would want to see next to Shai?
I was just going to say, imagine a backcourt of Cade Cunningham and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, dude. That would – that's matching the Dennis Johnson, Gus Williams backcourt of the 80s and the 70s. That would be awesome. Otherwise, I think Jonathan Kuminga would be a great fit there too, to add a high-flying forward with Shai's limitless potential at the guard position. I'm a huge fan of Shai, and I think he's going to be a superstar in this league. Personally, I'd take him over Trae Young 10 times out of 10. I love Shai, and I think if I had to build a team around one player in this league, Shai is easily in my top 5 or 6. I'm a huge fan of him, and I think once the Thunder actually build a halfway decent team around him, they're going to be very scary. And I don't know if it's going to be the next 5 years, but maybe the 5 after that, we'll see the Thunder really showing out.
Hey, don't forget, earlier this season, we were seeing Oklahoma City Thunder's Instagram post Al Horford for an all-star selection. And that just shows you how this team is right now. And I know that that'll make you laugh as a Sixers fan. But Shai really is just putting on a show for this Thunder team. And I completely agree with you. If I want to build around a player, there's a very limited amount of players that really want to build around over Shai and how just fantastic of a leader he is. Off the court, his just swagger on the court. I just love his presence. I think he's just one of these bright young players that we will see for sure. A very, very long time. Yeah. And without further ado, that'll wrap up at today's mid-tier teams. We talked about a lot of teams with just one NBA championship. And next podcast, when we rank our top 10, I know everyone's excited for who we put at 1 and 2, but we're going. I
wonder what the 2 teams that have 17 championships. I wonder if they'll be 1 and 2.
Yeah, hey,
don't forget. The question is who's won.
That is going to be that's up for debate. But thank you to everyone who tuned in today, whether it's on the YouTube channel, the Facebook page, or just on the I-95 network itself. As we brought it up multiple times on the screen, but Zach's going to be making an Instagram post right after this is done. I believe it's on the Atlanta Hawks series. Yes, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
19, I think it's 1949 to 1994, I believe I'm covering on this one. And then the most recent 25 years will be on the next one in like 2 days or so.
Exactly. So make sure to follow us on Instagram at Backcourt Press. Thank you to everyone who watched the podcast. You can always rewatch it if you missed the live on my YouTube channel at Hunter Manic on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Backcourt Press _. And thank you to I-95 Sports Network for having us. As always, this has been fun. And don't miss out on next time where we do our last part in the series, which will be ranking the top 10 franchises of all time. Thank you all for watching. Hope you have a good rest of your day. And it's been Backcourt Press. Peace out.